The Racing Pod
on Off the Ball
with William Hill. Who you got? 18 plus. See gamblingcare.ie.
It's Derby weekend. It's the Racing Pod on Off the Ball. The race that still is the most iconic race, really, in Britain. And Thom Bugsy Malone is going to join me very, very shortly. But if you've no interest in racing and you're listening to the first sort of part of the show, free to air, we will talk about a really, really intriguing subject. Really intriguing subject. I promise you, if you're bored by this, you'll never have any interest in racing, or even sport regulation in general, or just the mystery of life, I suppose. We're going to talk about that shortly. Second half of the podcast each week is for members, and go to offtheball.com/join and you'll find out how to join. Thom, how have you been?
Yeah, not too bad, Johnny. Not too bad. Looking forward to a Derby weekend. But as you mentioned last week, you're just like, you come out of the Guineas and that, and you're really looking forward to the Derby and Royal Ascot. You just think, let's just have a nice build up to this race, and let's just keep it between the ditches, quiet enough, sort of few days, and then in steps that instant Redwood Queen.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the first half of the show. We'll talk about primarily the Derby. We have really good races on the Saturday at Epsom and a nice stakes race at Navan and a couple of other races to talk about in the second half of the show. Bugsy mentions Redwood Queen. Now, this Redwood Queen incident did actually happen last week, but because I've been sort of writing a piece about it in recent days, and because I wasn't here last week, and because Bugsy is analysing this week, we will talk about it in a bit more depth. And also, I feel I spoke in a podcast on IrishRacing.com earlier on the week. I felt it was one of these rare things, Tom, where I looked at some of the comments afterwards, and there was a bit of criticism of me, and I felt a lot of it was warranted ultimately. So I almost want to kind of set the record straight. But if you weren't watching Redwood Queen, actually, I'll ask you. What, in terms of facts, what happened? And you can take the floor.
Well, what we know, what definitely happened, Redwood Queen drifted like a barge in the betting, was 6-4 in the morning, went off 13-2. We know that. The eventual winner of the race was very well backed into 1-3 favourite as well. So they're facts. We're coming to the sort of last, and Redwood Queen is kind of well clear, and Philip Burns, who's in the saddle, has what you could charitably describe as a pretty soft unseat, and allows the very short price favourite, who was a classy horse as well, come home and win the race. And since then, kind of all hell has broken loose, hasn't it? Because there have been suggestions that he, took a fall, he took a dive. I'd say it's the most watched piece of footage since, it reminds me of the JFK movie, when they just sort of stop and rewind and trying to see, what happened when. But look, it was a very, very soft unseat. And then the stewards on the day decided, no case to answer there, and didn't submit any kind of notes or minutes of the incident as well, which was odd. And obviously since then the IHRB have said that they will investigate, and there's suggestion that other pieces of evidence will come into play, but it was certainly a very soft unseat, and there have been wild speculations that it's a very nefarious situation where the jockey has taken a dive here.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, I think, Thom and I are in the game long enough to be of the core of truth is presumption being innocence at the start, and that's absolutely where I'm coming from with this, and I will give everyone the benefit of the doubt. There are a couple of aspects to this, in the sense that we haven't heard from Philip Burns, and this is difficult for me in coming to some sort of conclusion on the case, because Philip Burns was not brought in by the stewards, 3 of whom were ex-jockeys on the evening. So the stewards obviously felt they needed to look into something. That he wasn't brought in and spoken to is inexplicable. And obviously that piece of post-match, when you speak to a player or manager after the race, and after a match, you get all the emotions. Same with racing. So the jockey has to explain one of the softest unseats I think I've ever seen, basically, anyway, at least, right? So he didn't come in and explain that. On Saturday.
So just one thing you said there, just one other thing you said, you did mention their ex-jockeys in the stewards room, and I one of those ex-jockeys in particular has now gotten a reputation for being absolute poacher turned gamekeeper on this sort of stuff. So just in defense of the stewards on the day, one in particular, I'm not going to mention them, but like they now have a reputation for really calling out any sort of issues by jockeys, and is, very, very sort of, as like I said, poacher turned gamekeeper on situations like non-triers and bits and pieces like that. So I will say that in the stewards on the day's defence. The other thing I will say is that the Irish field did well and did get quotes from Charles Burns, where he said, Philip had a couple of last fence falls recently, so he wanted to go in short, pop it, make doubly sure. She came up out of his hands, hit him on the backside, he was knocked off balance. He's very upset about it, and he won't look at his phone. So Elijah had to go racing in Limerick the next day, and we gave her 2 runs, good right there, of course, one on Sonny Boy Liston the next day. Charles said, Philip is only 21 and hoping to get over this setback. He's a good rider. Doesn't get many outside rides, but anyone who's using has been very happy with him. So obviously his dad has come out to bat for him, and that was in the on the front page of the Irish Field last week as well. So there are quotes out there where obviously the trainer has defended him.
Yeah, you've missed a couple of crucial aspects to that article, which I'll bring up very shortly. And just to prove that nice guys do win, Mark Oslo is one of the good guys, and he pulled off the interview that everyone wanted. Such that when I was in, speaking of nice guys or otherwise, when I was in Listowel on Saturday, Charles didn't talk before the race, that of Sonny Boy Liston, and that's fair enough. In fairness to connections, Charles Burns generally has given me interviews, some really good interviews, I would argue.
Brilliant interviews.
Philip didn't after the race. Maybe that's because I was very kind in the interviews. Philip did not talk after the race, and that's absolutely his right, but, he didn't talk after the race, so I can't relay what he thought of in the instance. The problem with this case is that if the trainer were somebody either very well known or someone obscure, someone that wasn't Charles Burns, it would be looked at a bit differently. But Charles has a rap sheet with the IHRB/Turf Club, and some of the cases, are so kind of difficult to read back on now that his reputation does precede him going into a case like this. That's how it works as well. There is a sort of
absolutely.
Now this is the aspect of the sorry, Bugsy, just briefly. This is the aspect of the interview that there were a couple of things where Charles said to Mark Oslo on the Irish Field, it's a sad day essentially if the Turf Club have to respond to faceless people on social media. That's a mad take. That's an absolutely mad take. Everyone is talking about this. Everyone is talking about this. People with faces are talking about this.
Australian podcasts have picked this up.
Everyone is talking about this. And he did then say in relation to Mark Oslo asked him about, let me just find this. So when asked whether he would provide his own betting records on the race if requested to do so by the IHRB, Burns responded, I'm not getting into the betting side of it. Now, I don't know what that's about. I have no idea what that's about, but that to me raises a million questions, an absolute million questions. And I've said this is the one thing I will reiterate, what I said on the podcast on Monday, and I thought it was sort of obvious what I was saying without saying it. I do have a lot of sympathy for Philip Burns here. Over to you, Bugsy.
Yeah, I do too. And one of the things, look, it was a very soft fall. There's no getting away from that. And I don't think anyone will kind of say otherwise. It just looks so bad. It just looks so bad. The one thing I will say is that, Charles is kind of renowned and has a good reputation, has been very, very shrewd. If this turns out to be, something nefarious, it doesn't seem very shrewd. You know what I mean? Like, what was the benefit to Charles Burns for this? Like, when they're going to go and win the race anyway. I mean, I just can't see how. It just doesn't seem like it's something that would. I remember one of my favorite Charles Burns stories is I knew a jockey and he went to ride a bit of work from before he rode in a massive handicap, right? And he went down to the yard. No, it wasn't. But no,
not yet.
But it was a few years ago, and he went down to the yard and he rode this big brown horse, and did a bit of work, grand, and that's grand. And he went to the races on Sunday, and he went to get legged up, and he got legged up in a black horse. So like that's kind of the level of. preparation and planning that might go into a Charles Burns gamble or a Charles Burns coup. So that's why I don't get the just like that's what doesn't add up for me. You know what I mean? Like, why you do something so silly on an absolutely nothing race in Wexford, where how much are you going to get on the prize money? Like,
it was $6,000 prize money, right? $6,000 to win the race, which would have been basically shared between Cahill, the owner, his son, Philip, the rider, his son, and Charles, the trainer. There's no suggestion Charles laid a Redwood Queen. It's pretty much impossible to do this in any event.
You couldn't do that.
You can't do that.
Like,
even basically, I've learned this week, you can't lay horses substantially anymore in general anyway. So there's no suggestion.
Especially not on a midweek run-of-the-mill Irish meeting where there's very little liquidity anyway.
There's no suggestion. But, I reiterate this. I was unable to speak to either of the connects. So I'm somebody who's very, very open to... I find with history, like whatever your understanding is of something in the past, it's wrong. But the more you read about it, the more right you'll be. And that's we all have our own versions of history. I have my own version of what I think happened here. But I do feel that it's incumbent on the IHRB. And you look at...
Absolutely.
You look at some of the... Again, I spoke about this in the piece, right? You look at some of the cases they've been involved in, where in my view, the IHRB have done sterling work. The Foxrock case, right? They basically proved that Foxrock could not have lost the shoes in the race because he had them on video after the race. They basically proved that Foxrock's shoes came off between him ending the race and reappearing in the parade ring in a tiny length of time. And they still lost. They still lost that case, which, so if you're demoralised by that, then you have the Yufton case where they look for whatever that went on for 3 years. And eventually they weren't even able to come to the last hearing themselves because it was kind of quashed on veterinary evidence. And an awful lot of work would have gone into that case. We also had the Viking Horde case where an awful lot of work went in. And that is a key case as well to understand some context to what may or may not have happened this time. The IHRB gets mocked, it gets derided like a lot of integrity bodies. And... it's often on the defensive, and I'm sure some of the stewards here have been on the defensive since this incident, but it deserves to be able to have the wherewithal and the resources to look at this properly, whatever the outcome.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with any of that. But again, this is an impossible case to prove because there's absolutely no way you can go and say that jockey had like Charles Burns' explanation to that race. And if you look at it, kind of stands up. It looks like the mare does kind of smack her on the backside, and it's a very, very soft fall. There's no doubt about that. It's a very soft fall. But to try and disprove Charles's take on that, and if Philip goes in and says the same thing, like that video can't really disprove that take, I don't think.
Yeah,
unfortunately. And like, no matter how many times you slow it down and say, oh, well, it looks like, his right foot moves this way, his right foot. Like, it looks like he gives the mare a little squeeze in the belly, just hoping she gets to the bottom of the fence. And actually, instead of that, she just jumps out of his hands. And that's what flicks him out of the saddle. And yeah, it's a very, very soft unseat. But to go and prove that, you have to look at evidence elsewhere to go and prove that something nefarious has happened here, unfortunately.
I looked at her runs. I think she'd run, say, 10 odd times for the yard over hurdles. She barely made a mistake in those races. I've watched the race.
She doesn't make a mistake. That's it. She doesn't make a mistake. She jumps it really well. She jumps it really well. So that's why, you're missing half a stride. You're sitting there hoping the horse comes back and just gets to the bottom of the fence, because that's what you want to do. You're coming to the last in front. You'll want to just get into the roots and sit and pop. And she actually stands off it a bit. And there's just a slight, an ever so slight miscommunication between horse and rider. And that happens. Like, that happens. But because of everything else that's happened, it has to be brought into question why it's happened,
As I say, like, I'm not out to be harsh on anyone, and I really do hope that a young rider has a proper career. I think he's an excellent horseman. But this investigation will be in the news until it's over and afterwards, and for good reason. And if I were canned a bit, and you should never look at the remarks anyway, but if I were canned a bit on Monday, I can kind of see why people would have said that. I think Thom has been excellent on it as well. I think we've given it as fair a version as we can without hearing any more from the rider or trainer. Let's get on to the Derby. The Epsom Derby is on at 3:30 in honour of His Highness the Aga Khan. this year, this race on Saturday, we're recording this at a 1:15 on Friday, so we're unable to talk about Friday's action. But I love this meeting. You know, you have the Dash, you have the Oaks, the Cornish Cup, and then you into the Derby. The runners in the Epsom Derby, as I say, in honour of the Aga Khan, Al Wasl Storm, Damasus, Delacroix, Greenstorm, Lamburn, Lazy Griff, Medak, New Ground, Nighttime Dancer, Night Walker, Pride of Aris, Rogue Impact, Ruling Court, Sea Scout, Stanhope Gardens, Tennessee Studs, The Lion in Winter, Tornado Alert, and Tuscan Hills. So 19 runners. Cracking field for the race. The place to start, I think the place to start is probably Ruling Court. Now, the weird thing is, Bugsy, we're talking about this race before knowing the outcome of the Oaks. And we have, we have a favourite in the Oaks for me who has so much to prove in terms of stamina. Whereas with Ruling Court, who's by Justify out of a High Chaparral mare, at least on pedigree. Now, the mare, whatever happened in the Oaks, she did stay a mile well as a 2-year-old. This horse ran over 7 as a 2-year-old, but he's a very good attitude and he stays a mile well as a 3-year-old. But I do find it mad. You never really see this where you see horses just jump from a mile to a mile and a half, just like that, and they're fancied in both races, except in these classics, and it's still great to see. Talk to me about Ruling Court. He was behind the line in winter at York when he was very well fancied. He was a horse, obviously, that was a breeze-up purchase for massive money. I loved his attitude in the Guineas. Will he get a mile and a half?
I think he has to. He's by Justify out of a High Chaparral mare. Yeah, really intriguing that he comes from the breeze ups. 2.3 million he cost at Arcana. I was speaking to Mark Boylan of the Irish Field about this during the week. You know, it's a bit like the Spider-Man meme, where, you know, the two Spider-Man, because we've got a Godolphin horse by Justify and a Coolmore horse by Dubawi at the top of the market for the Derby. So, you know, even no matter what way things go, they're both secretly happy for each other. But I think Ruling Court's brilliant. I really like him. I'm not 100% sure he'll stay. It's that he's the best horse in the race, isn't he? At the moment, he's rated 121. The form of his Guineas has been boosted massively by Field of Gold absolutely sluicing up at the Curragh. I'm not saying he can't win. I'm not saying he'll win, but he is the best horse in the race. But we don't know if he'll stay, but he's bred to stay. You know, by Justify out of a High Chaparral mare. He's obviously a beautiful, beautiful mover. You know, you go to that kind of money in a breeze up sale to go to that kind of money, given his pedigree. He's obviously an absolutely exceptional individual. And, you know, why wouldn't you go to the Derby after winning the Guineas well, and probably not getting the credit for it because of all the furore about Field of Gold and the ride. But I think a lot of the time analysis says that William Buick gave Ruling Court an absolutely exceptional ride at Newmarket, and look, he is a deserved favourite. But I'm struggling to see what Delacroix has done wrong.
Is he your selection in the race, Delacroix, ridden by R.L. Moore over Line in Winter?
He is. Yeah, he is. I've kind of make a joke about this all the time, that the Lion in Winter is one of those kind of horses that seem that the lads on Twitter just love, just because he's put in one good run and then they went nuts when he bombed out behind Pride of Aris. Delacroix has a much better body of work put together to suggest that he is a legitimate Derby contender versus sort of one run from the Lion in Winter, who obviously weren't brilliant performance he put in at York, having won well. But like, yes, he beat Kerwood and Ides of March at the Curragh on debut, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't first choice that day. Wayne Lorden rode him. He was 11-2. There was a bit of support for him. I'm pretty sure he's the only seat of stars in Aidan O'Brien's yard. That was it. Ryan Moore rode Ides of March that day. I'm just not sold on him. Obviously, you have the situation where we had in the last 2 years with August Rodin and City of Troy, who both completely bombed in their prep runs, and then they went and won the Derby. So I think that might be playing on people's minds as well. But of the Ballydoyle runners, I'm certainly with Delacroix.
Yeah, I'm seeing stars here. Just one, Thom Malone, to paraphrase from The Simpsons. We're going to have to end this half the show. Tennessee Stud is my selection in the Derby. He was actually behind Delacroix. Bugsy, you're actually going to say he has a life at 40-1.
What? He does. His form, his 2-year-old form, his form on soft ground, he has a chance. He's by Wooten Bassett, who can't sire a loser at the moment. everything going his way. And again, Joseph, his horses, it's just like Aidan. If they get beaten in May, I wouldn't bother me in the slightest. They finish in the podium in May. That's it. They win next time out. Albeit, look, maybe not a Derby, but he'll certainly step up massively for that run.
Yeah, he's 28th with Hills. We will speak to Hills. Dave Kelner, second half of the show. Now, you couldn't have listened to that first half without obviously wanting to subscribe. Go to offtheball.com/join. In the second half show, we're going to talk the Derby in more depth. We're going to talk about the undercard at Epsom Navan and Bugsy's charity bet as well. So lots to come.